This is the Worship Lounge. Welcome back, 2010. Here's a question from Sarah. We are looking to expand our worship team with new musicians. There are currently 5 of us who play every single week. God bless you. Desperately seeking God and trying to bring the church on in its understanding of worship and not just singing songs. We've been through some issues with very talented musicians, but who have not been in the right place with God, and the devil had a field day. That's an interesting statement. Coming out of that situation, we want to encourage new people to worship with us, but are worried about their lack of understanding of the fight they will be involved in. I hope this makes sense. My question is, how do we go about introducing newbies other than lots of prayer? God bless, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. I think this question is asked by pretty much every worship leader around the world right now. When is it okay to invite somebody in? At what stage of their walk with the Lord is it appropriate to include them? And even how long do they need to have been at the church before they get to go on stage? This is a tricky area, and I bet there are a lot of really good answers to this question. So I'm just going to give you one of them, and if it helps, fantastic. My view on this stuff is, on one level, on the pastoral level, it's a little bit like having kids. You do your very best to train up a child in the way they should go. You pray as hard as you can. You try be as good a parent, or in the worship context, as good a leader and pastor and friend as you can be. But at a certain point, you may not succeed in bringing them to the point of faith that you hope for them and long for them. Is this your fault? Sometimes it can be, but most often it isn't. We're human beings and we get to choose. Does that mean that we can just let anybody up on stage? I don't know. Look, somebody said this to me once, and it made a lot of sense. He said when he looks at people, and this is just about church leadership, not just music leadership, he likes to see where the arrow is pointing. So if you imagine every one of us is like this little compass arrow, and it swings around. Sometimes it's pointing off in the wrong direction, but occasionally it's pointing right in the right direction. Now that person could be like 1,000 miles from where you are, and they walk towards the Lord. But if the arrow is pointing in the right direction, invite them in, include them in. And the person who made this comment said, when were the disciples Christians? When did Peter, James, and John become Christians? At what point did they become Christians when they prayed the sinner's prayer? Did they become Christians when when Andrew said to Peter, "Hey, let's go follow Jesus"? Was it then? His argument was there is a moment when that happens, but we don't necessarily know. We know for ourselves, but we don't necessarily know for other people when that is. So if the arrow is pointing in the right direction, fantastic. You could have someone on your team who's been attending church, maybe following the Lord for 15 years, but for whatever reason the arrow is swung around and it's pointing in the other direction. The argument from this perspective is that I'd rather have somebody who's new to the faith, new to Jesus, new to the idea of following him, but whose arrow in his heart is pointed towards him, than someone who's been around for ages, but whose arrow in his heart is pointed away from the Lord. And that also requires pastoral compassion and care, and there's a special blessing for those who lead people who are going astray back to the Lord. Thank you for your question. There's no easy answer to this question. I know that the one thing you should not do is force somebody against their will to stay. You can't do that. As much as it makes life complicated on a practical level to administrate the worship bands and teams and musicians who's going to play. If someone is not interested, the worst thing you can do, especially in particular with volunteers, is to force them to stay. I've been in that situation, and it's super unhealthy. It doesn't model the way of Christ, the style of Jesus. Jesus' approach was come and see. People were allowed to come and go. One of my favorite passages is the moment of his ascension, when Jesus is ascending into heaven, They said the disciples worshipped, but some doubted. If it was me and I was Jesus at that point, I would have come back down to earth and gone, what the heck do you want from me? I promised I was going to die and rise from the dead. I did that, and now I am ascending through the sky into heaven, and still people are doubting. But he doesn't come back and force them to worship him. Always the Lord allows us our choice in our free will. If you're struggling with people who are losing heart, you can encourage them, you can talk to them, but please, speaking as somebody who's made this mistake before and who's been on the receiving end of this mistake, don't force people to stay if they really want to go. God bless you.